We can turn our Bibles again to Daniel chapter 11, and I'd like to direct your attention to verse 2. This is page 792 in your Pew Bible. There we hear Christ, the pre-incarnate Christ, saying to Daniel, his servant, "And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Now I will tell you the truth." Congregation, I remember sitting in my grade 8 history class, and on the first day of the school year, we received brand new history textbooks. And that was kind of a big deal because going to a Christian school that ran on a tight budget wasn't every day that we received new textbooks. And so I remember getting that textbook. It wasn't a hand-me-down that looked battered and beaten, but it was brand new. I can still picture it today. It had this brown cover, and on the front there was these pictures of the ancient world and ruins from that time. I remember opening the textbook, and the first heading that caught my eye was this: "History is his story." History is his story. That simple heading is packed with a profound truth. History is God's story. God is the author of history. He's the author of every single event and detail in the world that has ever happened in the world, and the author of every single event and detail in our lives. What happens in time is the unfolding of what God wrote in eternity. History is God's story. He's the author of history. Now, as we've been looking at Daniel's life and his recognition that this is true, that God is the sovereign God, this doesn't lead Daniel to fatalism, but it leads him to activity and confidence, knowing that the Lord is the author of history. But God is also the theme of history. All of history, all of the events of time and space is his story. It's about him, his work in this world, his interaction with his creatures. And this means that all of history is redemptive. Yes, even before the fall, God had his redemptive purposes firmly fixed. Jesus Christ is the Lamb of God who was slain before the foundations of the world. All of history is redemptive. All of it is moving towards Christ. There's this linear flow to history: creation, fall, redemption, consummation. History is going somewhere, and it's going towards Christ himself, when he will be all in all, and when his enemies will be made his footstool. So it's not like how the world describes history. Relativists or post-structuralists today will say history is just random events. We're not going anywhere. Or if we are going somewhere, it's because of the evolution of man. There's this progression in man. God's not in the picture, but man is slightly and ever so slightly over time getting better. That's how the world views history, but that is not the true and biblical view of history. No, history is redemptive. God is the central theme, and God's glory is the goal of history. History is moving. All of time is moving steadily to that moment when Christ will be crowned king, and when every eye will see that he is Lord. So history is his story. That's our title for this morning, His Story. And the reason that's our title is that Daniel 11 presents us with one of the most detailed histories of the ancient Near East, beginning from Daniel's day in 538 BC all the way to 163 BC, about 400 years. Daniel 11 spans 400 years, and it goes even into our future as well, as we will see. But there's a major difference between any history textbook and the history lesson that Daniel receives from the pre-incarnate Christ. And here's the difference. Any history textbook that we open is a fallible recording of past events. A fallible recording of past events. And the history that Daniel receives from Christ is an infallible detailing of future events. Here is Daniel, and Christ is giving him the history lesson of things yet to come, in detail, describing what will happen in that area of the world. And so it's his story. Christ is giving Daniel a sneak preview of what's going to happen. And this then raises a question. It's a question that liberal scholars will raise. In fact, the reason why many liberal scholars reject Daniel as being written by Daniel in the 6th century is chapter 11. They say there's no way someone could have written this, a man could have written this 400 years before all of these things happened. It's too detailed, it's too exact, and it fits too perfectly. And so they'll say this is prophecy after the fact. Obviously, someone watched these events happening and then wrote it down. Now, there are many good reasons why we reject this, but ultimately it boils down to a basic starting point, a presupposition that these liberal scholars have, and that is they rule out God from the start, thinking that there is no such thing as a God who can detail the events of time in advance. And so really, the spirit of these unbelieving liberal scholars is matched by what we have already seen in this book. Just think back to Nebuchadnezzar. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? He says, there is no God who can deliver these men from the fiery furnace. That was chapter 3. There is no God who can do this. Or Darius in chapter 6. Is there a God who can deliver from the mouth of lions? And now this unbelief lives on in the skeptics to get today. Is there a God who can speak beforehand? There's no God who can do that. And so they condemn themselves by displaying the same spirit of the men we have read about in this book. The Christian, on the other hand, says this is absolutely true about God. He is the God of truth, and the Word is his record of truth. And so with that in mind, our title is His Story. First, we'll see the futile frenzy. Second, the focused fury. And third, the final foe. His story, first of all, the futile frenzy. Now, as amazing as the details are in this chapter, we quickly realize that we aren't given names and dates. And there's many reasons for that. If God gave us names and dates, it would actually be less believable. Because if God gave us names and dates, it would be as if someone, Alexander is opening this book and he sees this is what I must do. Okay, self-fulfilling prophecy, I'll do that. And so skeptics would have reason to doubt. If there were names and dates here, they would have reason to doubt this is just self-fulfilling prophecy. But there's another reason. If God gave us names and dates, we would trust him less. If God told us exactly the moment Christ is coming back, year 2050, we don't know the year, but if that's what he said, 2050, then we would sit back. We have many years. That's our heart. That's our nature. We would think we can put it off. And so the Lord, the way in which he gives prophecy is that he gives enough detail that keeps it urgent. It's pressing upon us. It demands faith. It demands trust. And so is the case here with Daniel. And so we need to realize that the main point of this passage is then not to be able to check off all the names and dates. Who is this and what did he do? No, I will give you some names and dates, but the main point is to catch the major themes. And the major theme of verse 2 to 20 is futile frenzy. Futile frenzy. If you have that in mind as you read through these verses again, you will see that to be the case. What you're seeing here is a list of a flurry of human activity that is ultimately useless. There is this futile frenzy, this empty human effort to grasp at success, to grasp at victory, to try and conquer lands, but then they're defeated, and then they're tricked, and they're out-schemed, and they fail. That's the theme that's coming to us as we read these words. Almost in every verse from verse 2 to 20 is stamped this word futility. Futility, failure, frustration, emptiness. And so let's begin then. Let's look here at verse 2. Now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. And so notice the key word here is the small word shall. Shall. The 4th shall be far richer. He shall stir up all against Greece. And this little word shall appears 110 times in this chapter. Shall. This shall happen. Why is that? Because this is Christ telling us with certainty what will happen. This is his story. All of these people will do these things. This shall happen. Now, the 4th king is most likely Xerxes. He's the king of Persia. We also know him as Ahasuerus. We read about him in the book of Esther. This is Ahasuerus from the book of Esther. And it tells us in the book of Esther that he was a man of great wealth, as Christ tells Daniel here. And in Esther, we find him in the beginning of Esther hosting these banquets of 180 days just to display his wealth and his glory. And so here Christ is telling Daniel that this king shall be far richer than them all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. And Xerxes is the one who has, through his money, purchased many soldiers, mercenaries, and raised this vast army and came against Greece with all of his strength. He went to attack Greece, but he miserably failed at the Battle of Salamis. There the Greeks were fighting for their freedom, and they pulled off one of the greatest upsets in the ancient history of the world. And so already in verse 2, we see this. Futility, failure, all of this money, all of this energy, and yet here is a man failing in his purpose. Then verse 3, a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Now this is Alexander the Great. Alexander, the one who defies all odds, the one who conquers the known world, who ruled with this great dominion, and it seemed that he could do whatever he pleased. He went wherever he wanted to go, and he crushed whoever he wanted to crush. But notice this, in Christ's story, Alexander only gets 27 Hebrew words. He's not that great after all. Verse 4, and when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. So Alexander the Great, the one who fills pages of the world's history books, he gets just 2 verses. And these words here describe the swift splintering of Alexander's empire. At age 34, he was struck down, and as soon as he arrives at the top, he gets knocked out, and his vast kingdom is broken, and his family is assassinated. It doesn't go to his posterity, but it's divided up among his 4 generals. And so again, futility, frustration, emptiness. Congregation, you can give your life to gain the whole world, and in the end, all you've done is lost your soul. Is that your life? This is the way of man. Futility, emptiness, pursuing much, receiving nothing in the end. Verse 5 then, The camera now focuses on two of the four kingdoms that come out of Alexander. And it says, also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So the king of the south, that is the king over Egypt. South of the promised land. So the promised land, Israel, is the center of the map here as Christ is speaking to Daniel. South of that is Egypt. And this king is Ptolemy the first, one of Alexander's generals. And as verse 5 says, just as Christ told it beforehand, one of his princes rises up against him. And that's Seleucus the first. He takes over Syria. He becomes the king of the north. And so that's what we're going to see in the next number of verses, this dueling between these two kingdoms, the king of the south, the Egyptians, the Ptolemies, and the king of the north, the Seleucid dynasty. And here we see this struggle, this tug of war that's happening between these two kingdoms of this world. And caught in the middle of it is God's people. Israel is the little highway that separates these two earthly powers. And this is reminding us that here God's people, Daniel is told God's people will be literally trampled on as the people of this world, the kingdoms of this world, seek to assert their own authority and attain their own ends. Well, verse 6, it goes on, at the end of some years they shall join forces. There's going to be an alliance between these two kingdoms. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. And history tells us that the Egyptian king Ptolemy II, he ends up giving his daughter Bernice to marry Antiochus II so that there could be peace between these two warring factions. But there was a slight problem. Antiochus was already married, and he thought he could deal with that, so he divorced his first wife, and all was fine for 2 years until the Egyptian king died. Ptolemy II, he died, and the deal was off. And so Antiochus divorced Bernice, took back his first wife, but she wasn't too happy with that, so she ended up murdering both of them. Futility, frustration, man scheming, man plotting, and it all ends in death. Verse 6 describes that she shall not retain the power of her authority. Bernice, she gets pushed aside and killed by Antiochus' first wife. Verse 6 goes on and says, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. That's Antiochus. He gets taken out as well. Man trying to make peace, and it leads to frenzy. Well, we could go on through the verses as this unpacks more and more of the story of time told from Christ beforehand. If you skip to verse 9, there we see this retaliation as Seleucus II tries to invade Egypt, and he ends up defeated, and he returns to Syria. In verse 10, his sons carry on his fight. So this is passing from generation to generation, this futility. And then verse 11, the king of the south, Ptolemy IV, moves with rage. His blood is boiling. His family feud continues, and he goes out to fight against the king of the north, and he musters, who shall muster a great multitude. History tells us again, Antiochus III now, he has this great army, 62,000 infantrymen, 6,000 cavalry, 102 elephants. They come against Egypt, the king of the south, and it's all for nothing. They're defeated. They're given over to Ptolemy IV. And so here we see this cycle of futility, this cycle of frustration. We could go on. History books record the accuracy of these prophecies. As Christ is telling it hundreds of years beforehand, he is telling of this futility and the frustration that plagues the ways of men. And so we could go on verse by verse. This cycle continues. And so do you hear it? The flurry of energy, the flurry of activity. It all ends in futility, in frustration, in failure. This is, the main point is here highlighting, this is the pain that comes from living on the path of sin. It's pain that marks that lifestyle. All the efforts, the dreams, the aspirations, all of the hopes, the things longed for, they just end in emptiness. This power that these kings are seeking to grasp at, it just slips through their fingers and it evades them all. All of this ambition, it's all sought through lies and cheating, conspiracies, murders, envies, greed. It's all short-lived victories followed by disaster. It's havoc. Now, as we read this, do we think, now, is there just something wrong with these people back then? All of this energy, all of this time spent, all of this havoc and this emptiness, this futile frenzy. If that's the way we think, then we are missing the point. The source of this havoc is the human heart. It's the human heart, and that source has stayed the same today. And so Jesus tells us about the heart in Matthew 7, verse 20. He said, "What comes out of a man, that defiles a man, for from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man." And so that's the point for us then this morning. As we read this history, yes, we see the truthfulness of Christ's word, and it bolsters our confidence in Scripture, but we also need to make this personal. And as we see the futility of man's ways, let's get to the source. Let's get to the heart of the problem. Let's listen to Jesus as he says, as he diagnoses our hearts, and he tells us that unless our heart is dealt with, we will follow the same path as Xerxes, as Alexander, as Ptolemy, as Antiochus, and all the rest. Their history of frenzy and futility will be our history if our hearts aren't supernaturally changed by the Spirit of God. And so has that happened for us? Have we had that gracious heart transplant where the Spirit of God has taken out this heart of stone, this heart which bubbles up and spews with all of this that we're seeing here, and has he replaced it with a heart that loves our God and that loves our neighbor? Well, because the human heart is the problem, that's why our world today hasn't changed much from back then. Yes, the names have changed, the places have changed, but the hustle and bustle is still going on. There's still the same futile frenzy. There are still people clawing after power, after wealth, after status, doing all they can to get ahead. This is the way of man. This is the way of our human heart, if left to ourselves. Conquer the competitor. Go and stamp on others so that we might assert ourselves. This is the way of the world. We see this in politics, but we also see this in business and in workplaces. Many businesses are cutthroat environments. We can see the truth of this text living before our eyes. This is the way of the world, and yet this is the world that Christ has chosen to enter. Here is the pre-incarnate Christ speaking about these things beforehand, and yet this is the world that he has chose to enter. All of this frenzy, all of this foaming that man is doing, and yet he has come into this world, and he has come for such sinners. Sinners like this, sinners with hearts like this. That is the one who Christ has come for. And so here we're seeing man's way. Man's way is to take by violence, and to take by storm, and by sheer power. He's trying to satisfy his lusts, and so there's no peace for the wicked because he continues trying to satisfy the cravings of his heart. That's what we're reading here. This constant gnawing that's longing and driving and pushing forward for more power, more wealth, more status. But that's not God's way. That's not the gospel way. Do you notice that these kings, the king of the south is trampling over God's people to get to the king of the north, and the king of the north is doing the same, trampling over God's people to get to the king of the south, and all the while they are passing by the one thing that can satisfy, and that is the God of Israel. That's the God who is displayed in the temple in Jerusalem, the temple that they're ransacking, the temple that they're defying. That's the one, the God of that temple, the God of Daniel. He is the one who can satisfy, and yet man doesn't seek this God. They're seeking to satisfy themselves in other places. And so this God cannot be received through might or through strength, but through humility, through coming empty-handed to this God, being humbled before him, receiving Christ as he's offered. Well, in these first 20 verses, we see the faithfulness of Christ's word as his prophetic word comes true in time. But we also see the failure of man's schemes. Second, then, the focused fury. The focused fury. Verse 2 to 20, that's 19 verses. That covers 355 years of world history. But now then in verse 21 to 35, 15 verses, this only covers 12 years of history. And so in the Bible, the biblical writer wouldn't highlight things or underline things, but in order to emphasize something, he would spend more time on it. And so here he spends 15 verses on 12 years of history. And this deals with the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now that name might sound familiar to you. We heard of him in chapter 8 in the vision of the ram and the goat. And this king was the little horn that grew off the goat. And he is the one who wreaked havoc against God's people, the great persecutor of the Jews. And so I don't want to repeat everything I said then, but just to draw out a couple points. Here is the focused fury. Here is this evil and vile man raising his fist against God's people. And so the first thing under this point is notice the major stress on the intense persecution that is coming. Verse 21, and in his place shall arise a vile person. That's Antiochus. A vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. This Antiochus, he weaseled his way onto the throne. He pushed aside his brother and his nephew, stomping on them as he did so, just to gain the power. He came in by intrigue. And verses 22 to 28 speak of his power and his military success. And then in verse 29, it begins to recount his focused fury against God's people. After being humiliated in Egypt, Antiochus returns to Jerusalem. Verse 30, it says, he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. And here it's when he returns from this upset, this defeat, that he returns and he forces the Jews to accept all of the Greek culture that he brought with him. Verse 31 describes this, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defy the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. And history tells us that this Antiochus, he comes to Jerusalem and he murders thousands, and he desecrates this temple. He sets up shrines to all of the Greek pagan gods everywhere he goes, and even in the temple itself. And there on the altar, he butchers a pig, an unclean animal, all to defy the God of the Jews. And so this was his focus. His focus was to make sure that he would do everything possible to see to the Jews apostatizing from their God, turning from their God. And he did everything in his power to root out biblical religion. Just a few examples. The death penalty was given for those who wanted to circumcise their infant males. Do you want to give your children the sign of the covenant? Then do so at the fear of death. Owning Scripture would get you killed. Observing the Sabbath day would get you killed by Antiochus. So this was a reign of terror. Antiochus was a man trying to write his own story and to do it in his own way. And he was doing this apart from God and against God through his own power. And the result was that thousands of other people suffered underneath his cruel fist. And again, things haven't changed much, have they? We just remembered Remembrance Day, thinking about how history repeats itself, and you see someone like Hitler trying to satisfy his own desire for success, his own vision of the world, and millions of people suffering as a result of his atrocities. Well, here the point is, in the second point that we need to see, is that the seed of the serpent continues to war against the seed of the woman. There is this focused fury. What's driving Antiochus? What's motivating him? Well, there are satanic forces behind him. This focused wrath, this fury against God. This is Satan raising his head, raising his power against God. And this isn't surprising then, because we see this traced all through Scripture. And we see this repeating itself all through time as the kingdom of this world seeks to triumph against the kingdom of Christ. But there is something surprising here. Remember, Christ is telling the story. And as the camera focuses on God's people, this is what we see. We see suffering. We see suffering, persecution. We see trials. Christ wants his people to be prepared for the suffering that's coming. Christ wants his people to know that this often characterizes their lives in this world. They are pilgrims. They are exiles. Don't be surprised when the suffering comes. God's people are often characterized by weaknesses, and they are assaulted. They are targeted. They're manipulated. They're persecuted. And Christ wants his people to see that. And so he focuses in these verses on the intense persecution that is coming for his people. But second, Christ also drops hints of encouragement. Scattered in this detailed account of the kingdom of Satan attacking God's people, there are these hints of encouragement. And the first hint is the fact that Christ is the one telling the story. Christ is the author of the story. And that reminds us, though, that he is not the author of sin, yet all of these evil purposes are accomplishing his good plan. It's going perfectly according to Christ's plan. Even when the church seems at its worst and things seem the most dire, Christ is still in control. He told Daniel this beforehand, so that Daniel and all of God's people would know that. He's in control, and these surprising events are working for his glory and the good of his people. And because that's the case, there's a second hint of encouragement here. Christ graciously puts limits on his people's trials. So you notice that at the end of verse 24. It says, "And he," that's Antiochus, "shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time." There's a limit. In verse 27, "Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time." It's still going according to Christ's plan. There are time limits. Verse 35, "And some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and to make them white until the time of the end, because it's still for the appointed time." This focused fury against God's people only goes as long as Christ says. He is the author. He knows what his people needs. And when it gets to be too much, he knows when to graciously intervene and to turn the course of history. The third hint, then, is that even in this time of focused fury against God's people will be strong in the Lord. You see that in verse 32. "Those who do wickedly against the covenant, Antiochus, shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits." This is the message of Daniel's book. The people who know their God in times of horrifying circumstances, they shall be strong because they know their God. Their Lord is their strength. God will continue to raise up Daniels throughout the generations. Not extraordinary people, but ordinary people who know their extraordinary God. And so they are strong in the Lord. The Lord is the strength of his people. And Christ promises that will be the case throughout all time. And the fourth hint, then, is that God has a purifying purpose in persecution. And that's verse 35. And some of those of understanding shall fall, some of God's people shall fall, and here's the purpose. They shall stumble. Why? To refine them, to purify them, and to make them white until the time of the end. Yes, the trouble that Christ has woven into the story of this world. Every single trouble has a purpose, a good purpose for his people. And one of the purposes of persecution then is to purify the church. It sifts out the hypocrites. It sifts out those of us who just are here out of formal obedience or out of practice, out of custom. If we are here, if we are worshiping, and it's only surface level, our hearts haven't been changed, then when persecution comes, we can be certain that we will not be here any longer because it just won't be worth it for us. The pain won't be worth it. God won't be worth suffering for. And so this is a call to us then. Do our hearts know this God? Are our hearts engaged with this God? Or is it just form and custom? We are going through and we will enter into times of persecution. And then there will be this sifting. But also then for God's people, that persecution, it only purifies them. Don't you love the words of the text? To refine them, to purify them, to make them white. It's as we are persecuted that we are reminded that God's loving kindness is better than life. And so, yes, we will even give our lives if that's what it costs. The Lord will hold his people faithful to the end. Well, the futile frenzy, the focused fury, and lastly, the final foe. Verses 36 to 45 suddenly move from being our history to being our future. In verses 36 to 45, it moves from Antiochus to the Antichrist. It moves away from Antiochus, who is a shadow, a type, a pattern, to the Antichrist, who will be the fulfillment, this final foe. And all throughout history, from that day in Daniel's age, we've seen the spirit of the Antichrist, this one who's been evident throughout the centuries, but it will climax in this ultimate evil foe, this ultimate enemy of Christ. Now, we don't know his name. I can't tell you who the Antichrist is, but there are characteristics, and there are 4 that I want to quickly point you to. 4 characteristics of this figure. First, autonomy. Verse 36, then the king shall do according to his own will. Autonomy. Autonomy means self-law, a law unto myself. And that's what's going to mark this Antichrist. He will be a law unto himself. He will do according to his own will. He will rule himself. He will make his own laws, as it were. And again, here he's reflecting the character of Satan. The promise that Satan gave to our parents in the garden is, you shall be like God. You shall get to be like God. You can make your own rules. You can rule yourself. And it's that attitude that rules and that governs and characterizes this final enemy. He will have autonomy. But second, blasphemy. The verse goes on, verse 36 says, he shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. Again, he'll be driven by this fierce hatred for the one true God, and he will seek to exalt himself over God. And he will openly oppose the true biblical God. He will speak blasphemies against him. And others will exalt this character and think that here is one who is divine. Here is one who can stand against God. The peoples of this world, the peoples of the kingdoms of darkness will rally with this figure in their fight against God. He is their head, and he is marked by blasphemy. But thirdly, then, dominance. But in their place, he shall honor a God of fortresses. In their place, he shall honor a God of fortresses. That's coming from verse 38. And that phrase, God of fortresses, it's a metaphor for making a God out of military strength, out of power, out of violence, out of conquest. And so this Antichrist, he will triumph through tyranny. He will triumph through asserting his own power. He will expand, and much like we've seen with these other kings, like Antiochus, going forward through this power, this right to rule. It's the survival of the fittest. That's his slogan. And so this is the kingdom of darkness. This is the Antichrist. And here's the thing we need to see as well. That though these characteristics detail the Antichrist, yet they also mark the people of the kingdom of darkness. Do these characteristics live in us? Do we seek to be autonomous? Are we living in open rebellion against this God? In our actions, in our words, in our thoughts? And are we seeking to rule our lives, to be the master of our own fate, to grab a hold of our lives through our own sheer willpower? Then that is just showing us that we are of the father of lies, as Jesus has said, of Satan himself. Well, verse 40 to 44 describe how this Antichrist will overwhelm this world. He will dominate and will seem unstoppable. Verse 44, therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. This is the fourth characteristic, defeated. Defeated. That's the end of the story for this evil and final foe. He shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Notice how there's all this buildup of all of his activity, and it comes to a crashing halt. Christ shall defeat him in the end. In the end, the one who is telling this story, the author of all time, he will return in glory, and he will triumph, and he will exalt himself. He is the king. That's the message of Daniel 11. Christ is king, even when it doesn't look like it, especially when this world doesn't look like it. We need to know Christ is king. He's the author of history. And so in closing then, I have one question for us. What side of history are you on? What side of his story are you on? Are you with Christ? Do you love Christ? Is Christ your king? Or are you against this Christ? There are many things that are true of us, many things that characterize our lives, but this is the fundamental difference. Either we are with Christ or we are against him. Well, Christ today is calling us to come and to be with him, to come. That there is still grace today to come and to join ranks with his side, to receive his forgiveness, to recognize how he has entered time for such hardened sinners, to save the lost, and to come ultimately bringing in the glorious conclusion to his story where we will reign with him forever in glory. Amen.